Welcome to This Week in Pulling, the show that brings you all the action from the world of tractor and truck pulling. I'm Dan Mayer, joined by Jeremy and Miles Krieger, and each week we'll dive into the latest highlights, breaking news, and behind-the-scenes stories from the sport we all love. From upcoming events, standout performances, and the rich history that shaped pulling into what it is today, we've got you covered. So buckle up, This Week in Pulling starts now. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to episode 4 This Week in Pulling. Dan Mayer joined by my good pals, Miles and Jeremy Krieger. Guys, how you doing tonight?
Hi, Dan, and welcome, everyone. Thanks again for riding along for episode number 4. We had a really good one last week, bringing you the top 5 two-wheelers in the power rankings, and really looking forward to this show. I feel like there's going to be a lot of activity and a lot of chatter back and forth about how this one went. Miles, what do you think?
Yeah, no, it's it's awesome to look at and have some folks discuss their rankings over the course of the last 7 days. Discuss their topics and kind of how we landed on ours. There were folks that reached out and said, "Hey, thanks for your opinions," and so I do appreciate those that are tuning in and listening and watching, and also appreciate those that have an opinion about this whole thing, because each of us do. Obviously the folks that are voting do. And as you start to dig into these rankings just a little bit more, a few years ago, we started doing some media kind of rankings where those of us in the media game tried to do it. And it's much cooler when I think it comes from the puller's perspective and how they categorize the folks that they're getting ready to go and compete against. So excited to reveal what in the history of this game has been one of my favorite classes. So
yeah, modified four-wheel drive, and a class that just like the two-wheel drives, pretty much, the rules, besides, the engine, we got some of the unlimited cubic inches on, the PPL and the outlaw side. But for the most part, trucks are pretty, universal as far as, coast to coast and, up into Canada and all places in between. So that pot, gets really big, like we saw with the two-wheelers.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're going to go with, once again, fellow pullers, going to vote on who the rankings are here. As we'll take a look at our rules once again here as we'll get right into it. Voted on by the fellow pullers. Now there's equal representation as follows. They're going to vote as far as, number 1 is 5 points. Number 2 is 4 points, and so on and so forth, right down the list. And whoever got the highest point total is going to be our number 1 ranked truck here in four-wheel drive competition. Now, as it breaks down, we had 9 from the NTPA vote, we had 5 from PPL, and then we had 4 from the Outlaws. So that all went into the mix here to get us where we are with our top 5. And well, you guys ready to get rolling here tonight? Here this week in pulling, we, not a lot going on with the world of pulling right now as we're, getting the schedules all finalized and everything, but I'm ready to get into this ranking. How about you guys?
Let's do it.
Absolutely.
All right. So we'll get rolling here with number 5 here. Well, there you go. Leading us off, number 5, ranked puller in four-wheel drive competition, Rob Foster. And Rob, going back, we saw at the farm show with the old Simply Red, going back to that, and kind of was thrown into the driver's seat, this past year, getting, but, as always, does a great job, and, former national champion and ranking number 5. So what do you guys think?
Excellent. Yeah, Rob Foster's no slouch. Always tough out of Fairgrove, Michigan. When they hit the fairground, they came to play, whether it be, Rob in the old Simply Red for many years. And then, of course, his daughter, Carmen, a great driver in her very own right in the Foster Child, and even his wife for a long time driver. Those Fosters are very, very tough customers out of the state of Michigan, and well-deserved in the number 5 spot.
I think if you are going to reflect on something in this situation, it's really telling of Rob. to think about the fact that he really wasn't in the seat for the last 4 years leading into this. I mean, they went from a 2-truck team with his old Chevy being sold out to Colorado, and him just being a tuner for his daughter. And then in 1 year's time, I mean, think about the respect he's already gained and earned from his peers to make it into the top 5. So pretty awesome for his sake. And as you both have already said, it's pretty telling for him to look right at it in the list and think, okay, I am in the top 5. That's pretty cool.
Absolutely.
And Rob, too, all time as far as NTPA wins goes in that top 3, we've got the Holman brothers, and then we've got, Rob Foster and Larry Peterson. We got that big gap, but, hey, a guy that has done it for so many years and so good at it, and very respected by his peers for sure.
Absolutely. So, we've recapped number 5. I think it's perfect time for us to transition straight from 5 to the puller who's ranked in the number 4 position this evening. And none other than Jim Bosch. When you look there at that list, the Midnight Raider, a gentleman who, we talked a little bit about this last week with some of our pullers as well, but a guy who just goes and pulls. And wherever he goes, he is in the hunt to win, does a fantastic job. His focus over the last decade or so has been really on the pro pulling league side of things, but occasionally will show up at an NTPA event. And you go back and you start looking at that historical archive. It was almost like a switch flipped when he and his son Dan started to work together on that chassis configuration years ago. And from that point, it's really been forward as you go, and even got to see Dan at Bowling Green do some driving. So kudos to Jim, and congrats on being
another Michigander in there. So number 5 and number 4. So let's, without further ado, talk about number 3 here tonight. Well, and what can you say that hasn't already been said about this bunch? One of the most recognizable vehicles in all of pulling, I think, but definitely in the 4-wheel drive class out of the great state of Ohio, the 4-play of the Holman brothers. As you just said before, Dan, the winningest drivers in the 4-wheel drive class by a long shot, by a country mile. Tough runners wherever they go, many-time national champions. And they are well deserved to be in the top 5 for sure. And I think we all 3 of us had them in ours as well. So, definitely the Holman's well deserved.
So the real question is, and if you look at the list,
it
says Paul Holman. So, the other question to that is, and I texted a current 4-wheel drive puller and said, hey, what do you think of this? And there are a few, on his list that I've already thought about myself, but the fact that he had them separated, he had both the Holman brothers in his top 5. So a pretty neat deal for the both of them. Now we all categorized them together. The Holman brothers were in the top 5 together as the Holman brothers.
Yeah,
on
I
our
think
lists.
that's kind of how you look at Holman brothers, you look at, the Blagraves, teams that have, back and forth driving like that. And, that 1960 Chevy, what else can you say about it? I mean, being Bowling Green this year, found, back in the winner's circle again. And it just, just when you think that, they're having an off year, they'll come in and put it on the podium. And it's amazing for how long that they have done this. And, you look at the championships, and then, maybe a couple off years and then another championship or two. It's incredible how to stay in it that long. And, when do you don't burn out, and it's just amazing. You look at it, and, I want to say 87 was the first year that they ran the 4-play truck as 4-play. And 40 years, it's like still going strong. Going to be in the mix again this year for a championship.
Well, and Miles, you and I, of course, are brothers. And can you imagine having to trade off like all those years? Like, I get to drive tonight. you drive tomorrow night, like, and they just do it. Like it's like there's
Yeah.
never, hey, I won last night. Let me drive again. Nope. Tonight it's your turn. That's just one thing that I've always kind of been fascinated about, with those two guys. And I've always wondered how that dynamic just sort of, winds itself through. And tonight it's my turn. Tomorrow it's your turn. And they both win. Like it's just really neat.
And to keep that intensity.
Absolutely. I
And just to
couldn't
keep that
agree more.
intensity up there, that it's just unbelievable that they continue to do what they do, and it just and when that truck backs in at that dirt and Bowling Green, they just know it's just impressive to watch. That is to say none, and boy, do the fans love them there, don't they?
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
So we'll move ahead here with number 2 here in our four-wheel drive driver rankings here tonight. So number 2 going to be Mark Mangan with the Outlaw, and a guy that national championships here the last couple of years, and he's been the man to beat on the NTPA side of things, and ranking number 2 here. And there's a team that 2 trucks normally you'll see out in competition. Mark did a lot of the driving on both the trucks this year until the girls were able to go out and get pulling. But very, very tough team, and they just keep climbing that ladder each and every year, and definitely a tough one right there.
Absolutely. And, like you said, a couple of national titles, and you'd be remiss if you were his peers right now to not document how hot they have been. Like that's just very deserving to put them in that spot. Like what they have done in the past couple of years alone, I think is well deserving of a top 5 ranking. And his daughters are great in their own right as well. But Mark is one heck of a driver, and
Okay, so yeah, you think about Mark Mangan and all of the successes he's had, and obviously that, as Dan alluded to, 2 daughters doing some driving. As both Abby and Anna have had their opportunities over the last 5 years or so. Anna being in the seat more the last 2 years, but I'm not going to lie to you. When you start to think in my rankings of where he has been, he was number 1 on my list. So that tells you that his peers obviously are ranking him very high as well. But over the course of the last 2 years, I think if I were going to circle one who at the end of the night I had a chance to watch, it's going to be him.
All right.
And guys, are we ready for the big drum roll? Are we ready for the final exciting
I'm ready
minute?
whenever you are.
Okay, without further ado, here is your number 1 ranked modified 4-wheel drive truck puller.
Crazy Jake.
It's the crazy man, Mr. Crazy Jake Zaring out of Fillmore, Indiana, with his rule number 19. And that Dodge has just been a very, very tough out. And you go back into the archives and you study and you really look at it, his days with ATPA and with pro pulling and running in the 4-wheel drive category. A very fitting name on this list. So guys, certainly let you have some discussion here as well, and then maybe we'll go into some reflection about some of the others we didn't have that didn't make the list that we may have had.
I think Jake Zaring absolutely deserves to be there. Rule 19, of course, funny story in and of its own right, with the no goofy stuff and the stories that they tell, but all the way back to the days of the Dixie Chopper and all the state level stuff and the region level stuff that he's done. Jake Zaring is one of the winningest drivers in the 4-wheel drive class, I think, regionally as well. So, I think he's no slouch. He deserves definitely to be in there. It seems like everywhere he goes, he's in the hunt, just as we've talked with all 5 here tonight. They show up on the property. Any of them could win. But, yes, definitely Jake Zaring, very deserving to be in this list, in my opinion.
And when you talk about Jake, it's almost like, he's been that top level for so many years, but you look at the last, 5 or so years, he has just upped that game that much more, and I think that's one of the things that you really notice with Jake is, where he, a couple wins here, there, but now it's like every single time he goes out, he's, right there in the mix, and, just one of those elite, I would say 5, 6 trucks out of the class that can win, and where, it's just kind of, both trucks, both, we got the bucket list and the Rule 19 that are, right there at the top. And it seems like that game has been, stepped up that little bit more. And, just very impressed, and the driving that he does, that is another thing too, is, you take some different track conditions and, he'll figure them out. And, they're always out there looking. I mean, all the 4-wheel drive competitors, they're always out there looking at the track, but, just making them adjustments and everything. It's been really neat to watch Jake here the last, 4 or 5 years, evolve, move on and up a little bit.
Absolutely. And I think not only the wins, though, but I think you could make a case for the fact that just general consistency with those guys. Like, they know where they need to be. They know what they need to do. And you don't see them second on a Friday night and 31st on Saturday. Like,
right.
They're always going to be, within a few positions of where they were the night before. And it's usually in the top 5. I mean, they've got it figured out. And if one truck is off, they're utilizing the fact that it's a 2-truck team to make sure that second truck isn't off, and it in most cases is much better the second time down the track.
And I want to also point out, we reached out to Jake this afternoon, wasn't able to come on and join us here tonight, but I'm sure that he would have something interesting to say for sure, but
for sure
wasn't able to join us here. But
yeah, I'm anxious to see as well. And I don't know how much is in depth this whole deal, but if you follow social media and you've been on Facebook in the last month, you'd also notice that there was a 2-wheel drive frame sitting in their shop, and kind of anxious to see what that might mean for them, and if that thing's going to come out and be on the circuit with the Grand National, or if they're going to run regional, or if they're not going to run, or what they do with that toy.
Yeah, always interesting, that silly season in pulling, what that could just be there just to get everybody's, just to stir that pot a little bit,
get
right?
The people talking, absolutely, for sure. But a great list of.
Well, I'll break the ice. How's that sound? I've already told you that I had Mark Mangan there at the top of my list, so I'll break the ice a little bit with my discussion and some of the thought process I had, and then I'll also tell you that one of the things that sort of consumed my mind the most is what do you do with regional level pullers who show up at national level events and find themselves in the hunt or in the winner's circle? And you think about Mason Brizendine from Bowling Green, but the gentleman who just continually comes to my mind, there's actually a couple of them, and those folks, you think about Jamie Bush, and you think about Mike Menke, guys like that, Bunky Davis and Peyton Davis, who weren't out for full runs last year as well. Those guys all would have been people who I was considering. From the outlaw side of things, you can't go wrong with the Ritters. You can't go wrong with the Thorntons. They proved themselves at Louisville each year as well in the hunt. The Skeltons, Tim Skelton and Ted Skelton both have been very, very tough as well. So you think about who I had in my 5. I had Mark Mangan. I had the Holman brothers. I had Highgear Hag and Terry Hagedorn. I had Zaring at number 4, and I had Steve Clem at number 5. And then the rest of them were kind of all right there. Jim Bosch would have probably been the next one that I put in my list if I were really going to dig even deeper and have a 6th. But my process is, like I said, as you start looking at it, I kept the Holman brothers together as one tandem. If I were to break it up, maybe Jim and Paul both hit my list. I'm not sure.
I'm surprised, because I'm surprised Terry Hagedorn isn't on the list. I mean, I had him as number 1 here on my list, with the Holman brothers number 2, and really surprised that didn't make that ranking this year. I mean, a guy that has done so much, the championships and, over the years. And the amazing part with Terry is he's won with the NTPA, he's won with ATPA, he's won with PPL, and he's also won with the Outlaws. Championships in 4 organizations, that's pretty darn impressive. I mean, and I can't think of, I can't think of anybody else that has done that, but that's kind of a surprise right there for me. I had Terry listed as number 1 for the ranking here. And I had Holman brothers number 2, I had Mark Mangan number 3. Jim Bosch number 4, and Steve Clem number 5 was my top 5. So that was kind of a surprise there when I heard the official top 5 come out in the rankings. But
For
hey,
sure.
we'll see. Maybe another championship this year, and maybe you'll be able to next year get on there a little bit.
Absolutely. And my top 5 is very similar to your guys, but I went with the Holmans number 1 simply because they are, in my opinion, from a longevity perspective and from an overall winning and performance perspective, the best. They have the most wins. They have the most titles so far. They are number 1. So that's where I went. Mark Mangan, after careful consideration, is number 2 in my top 5. Terry Hagedorn. I don't know. I would love to get some feedback or maybe some exit polling and understand, where he was in relation on the other people's top 5. Was he 6? Was he 7? Was he in an at-large capacity? But Terry Hagedorn was on my list at number 3. Jake Zaring at 4, and then number 5 for me was a tie between Rob Foster and Steve Clem, and the Radical. And of course, you and I had kind of mirrored him, but there's another very, very capable machine out of the great state of Kentucky that wasn't talked about by the populace in this particular vote. But again, it's very arbitrary, and we understood that coming in, and that's what makes it fun, because everybody's going to have their own opinion of who should be where. But I was just amazed at how close the three of us were. Like, we sort of overlapped one another, and I just think that without being right exactly, these are our top 5. We were like, okay, well, here's where I'm at, and you could basically draw lines between the three, our 3 top 5 picks. So I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah, it was pretty neat how we all kind of think together.
So here's another. Yep. Here's another question I'll pose at you. When you were thinking about it, were there some others that may have just kind of, you would put them on the list, but they hadn't quite gotten to that level? So I'm going to name this person, and when I do, you might think about it. But a guy who has been in the hunt, but just hasn't been able to get everything quite dialed in just yet is Mick Broughton. And, so Mick's been one of those guys. When I think he has, and we're not supposed to really reflect on horsepower and track configurations and all of that. It's just driver. I think he can drive his truck very, very well, and I think he does a nice, very, very nice job of that. So, he was on my short list of people to put in there as well.
Of course, on the short list. Also, Larry Peterson and Lisa. There's a couple there that could be discussed on any given evening. They are very, very, very competitive in their respective ranks.
Scott Phillips coming back this year.
Yeah,
that was one of the, have to be one of the comeback stories of the year. When you talk about 4-wheel drive, I mean, Miles, we had the opportunity last year at Chapel Hill when he had that chair stolen from him on the last hook of the event there. I mean, you just felt so bad for him. I mean, all them second places he's had there, and just wants that chair, and he was this close, and it just got snatched from him there. But Mr. Chapel Hill, Larry Peterson,
back with vengeance.
He got it done again.
Sure.
I will say the pass Larry made that particular evening was historical. I mean, that thing was just on a rail on that hook, and he had it dialed in and perfect. So, the 4-wheel drive class as a whole has been one, that just continues to grow in popularity and have a lot of folks there. Now, you either love them or you don't like them. I think that's something I've learned a lot from, and you really enjoy watching it. But it takes a lot of finesse, and it takes a lot of driving skill. And I think there's a lot to be said about these folks that are in consideration or on the list, because it's not something you just jump in the seat and do. You have to have a real skill to do it.
And another great thing about like the farm show, able to see, like the Ritters come in, the Outlaws come in, Thorntons, and the PPL guys with the NTPA guys, everybody just mixing together and running, and it's just a lot of fun seeing everybody there, and, how everybody, runs against each other. But, we got, like we talked about some of the, tough PPL guys, in the mix there as well, that, were kind of outside that top 5 range. Galen Young's truck there with his son doing the driving for all these years. And, so, I mean,
Justin Grace with the other team truck. And,
right.
We can, We can keep going. We can ramble them off.
Charlie,
There's no question. I mean, the Hitchcock truck from out in
Charlie Hines in
Pennsylvania, Charlie
Texas.
Hines,
Yep.
obviously Jeremy's about to say him, and there's been some serious tough runners in that game, and as it just keeps developing and horsepower evolves, there's kind of that sort of following for Sunnies, the folks that are trying to find something that will run with Sunnies. That's another beautiful thing maybe about Hagedorn is Terry's doing a tremendous amount of his development, and I think that makes a difference
the
for him
R&D
too.
department. And talking to Terry a little bit last year, he's getting more and more involved with that drag racing thing. He's talking about that R word that we'd hope we don't see anytime soon. He says it's in the future, but it's out there, but nothing that he's gonna hold to as hopefully for a while. I got to see High Gear out there for quite a few years, hopefully still.
Absolutely.
But yeah, so next week we're going to have the Pro Stocks. We're going to go tractors next week, and Pro Stocks will be our next class up. That'll be April 16th. They'll be followed by the modified class. Then we'll have the Super Stocks, which we're going to lump everybody together. We're going to have the diesel tractors, the alcohols, and the light tractors all grouped together. We'll have the mini rods beginning of May. We'll have the Super Stock diesel trucks the 14th, and then the final show for the rankings will be the unlimited modifieds. And boy, you look down the list there, and that's going to be pretty interesting to see how everything's going to shake out here with all these other classes. Now you got, mini rods where you've got, just like with 4-wheel drives and 2-wheel drives, you got a whole bunch of competitors there, and that'll be interesting to see how. Also, Pro Stocks, really, that'll be our first tractor class to look at, and what's everybody else think. So that'll be next week.
This is going to be hard, guys. If we had hard, if it was hard with our prognostications this week, it's only going to get more difficult to pick 5. It's not going to be easy, for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. Pro Stocks is definitely going to be a tough one. We've also got the Legend Series that we're going to launch this coming Saturday. Will be the first of the 3-part series. We had sit-downs with Wayne Roush, Wayne Sullivan, and the Bad Dog, Mike Stowe himself. And those will debut starting this Saturday. We'll have the Wayne Roush, and then followed with the following week. That'll be April 19th will be the Wayne Sullivan, and April 26th will be Mike Stowe's episode. So tune into those. I'll be debuting on Saturdays, and what a lot of fun that was to sit down and really the guys I grew up watching, 10 years old, 12 years old, watching these guys on TV and just, going over the old days. And boy, what a lot of fun that was. And can't wait to continue on with this series here as we move along.
And the stories that those guys can tell, I can only imagine what those interviews were like. And I can't wait to watch those. It's going to be great to see them for sure. But while we're thinking about it, I want to encourage everybody that's listening and everybody that's watching tonight to share your top 5 with us. Like I'd love to see, the folks that, chime in on who their top 5 4-wheelers are this week. And then we'll, maybe compile a list to see what the other people who, the general populace who didn't get asked to be a part of this survey thought. And maybe we could, do some comparisons and see what, the overall population is saying in terms of their top 5 in the 4-wheel drive ranks.
Yeah. Do you agree? Do you not agree? And
Sure.
Who do you think? And that's what we want to hear,
I got a question for you both too, and this is, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but did you happen to see the video and the post from Danny Johnson?
Yes.
I did.
On what happened with his truck, and then also kind of the rebuild or the efforts
together in a very short time. Yes.
So Monday, I think it was Monday, you get the post where, the frame's bent, the body's damn, it's like, oh man, it's like, oh man, that mid-season we're going to see Danny Johnson, and here we are Wednesday, and truck's fixed, ready to go. Like,
and I don't know if you guys watched that inside the cab, like he took a shot. Like yes. I was concerned about that whole situation, but be interested to know exactly, a little more backstory on that. But I mean, yeah, I saw that too. It broke and now it's fixed. For sure.
Yeah, it was like, wow,
Yeah,
I
so I
couldn't,
mean,
it was just amazing that, you're thinking, well, season
That's, yeah,
ending,
that's the end of that.
we'll see what happens here. And then before you know it, whoop, truck's fixed, we're ready. It's like, good to hear. Good to
For
hear.
sure.
But
so I don't know what his previous, setup might have been, but I think he was trying something different with his clutch setup.
okay.
And I going with a pedal clutch maybe, and seeing if he could get everything dialed in that way. And the thing about pulling is once you get started with the national series, if you're in the points hunt, there's no test and tune opportunity. Your points are so valuable. So, go early and try to get that in. I don't think his anticipation was he was going to do devastation to his truck, but pretty remarkable for his crew to get that back together, and then to have the frame issue, but also to try to make sure you get that thing back to true. And the next time he goes out there with his power right in front of him, you don't want that thing making a nice turn to right or left or however it is. So kudos to his crew and the folks working down there to get everything back together. Absolutely. With Desperado.
Yeah, and, for sure going to be back out on the Grand National Circuit, I would imagine, this year. Once again, probably he'll take that, what he tried this past weekend, and ain't going to try that again. I'm going to we're going to do something a little bit different.
Yeah, I think you're not on a very big limb there.
You never know. I mean, but like I say, trial and error, that's what happens. Like you say, once that green light goes for the Grand National Circuit, it's go time, and have your ducks in a row.
For sure. Well, guys, those are our top fives. Are you ready to kind of talk about some of our favorites over the years?
Absolutely. Now this was another one where we put together our all-time top fives. Now these are all-time top fives, not from like we just saw with the rankings. Have to be a current competitor. These are guys that we years and years we've watched, and we always like the trucks. And what do we kind of go off of on our? Was it the personality of the drivers or the looks of the trucks? I mean, a lot of them were looks of the trucks for me.
I think it's all of that, but I think it's just sentimental. I think it's nostalgia for us, like the ones you remember, to your point earlier when you were talking about being 10 or 12. I know Miles and I grew up with some particulars that are, we're going to talk about tonight, but I think it's a mixture of both. I think it's a mixture of what you remember about the puller and what you remember about the paint scheme. And it obviously made such an impression on you that, all these years later, you're still thinking about it. And, we'll talk, of course, Miles has, his wearing apparel on. I'm wearing some, got the old, got my favorite number one on here tonight that we'll talk about. But I think that, it's all of those things.
All right.
Well, I didn't list Rhonda as one of my top ones that we're going to show pictures of, but I obviously loved this Maybe Baby truck right here, and there were a few others that I will not get to necessarily discuss with a photo, but I have my photos there in full force here that we'll post in just a little while. So as I get started with my first one, and there are going to be 5 that I'm going to talk to you about, and I won't necessarily categorize them and say this is my favorite one of all time per se after I talk about this first one. And the first one that I will talk about is Gone Bananas. And of course that was the Mr. Hamilton, Jim Hamilton, and his Chevrolet. Dad was very close with the folks from his team and with him, and so there's a lot to be said about what he was able to do. But I loved that truck, and I loved being able to get to see him and talk with him and know him. So we'll categorize that as my all-time favorite truck. Now, what I would tell you we would categorize as my favorite 4-wheel drive driver from the past, that's Jim Moots and the Buckeye Shaker. I absolutely loved that Chevy S10, but I also loved Jim Moots. And he was a guy who I was always talking with whenever I saw him. And he gave me a T-shirt, and it became one of my favorite Lucky shirts. There were 2 shirts that before every cross-country meet and before anything that I had to endure as a child, I wore. One of them was Jim Moots' Buckeye Shaker, and the other was a shotgun red shirt that I got in the summer of 2000 or summer of 96 when I was running around with Harold and Betty Walliser with the OSTPA as part of the Buckeye Challenge. And so I got to make myself 2 shirts that summer on the screen print press. And that was one of the 2 that I did. And I took it with me, and I wore that thing before every cross country meet. I wasn't wearing a Floyd Central cross country shirt. I was wearing a shotgun red shirt.
I remember vividly.
Now I want to ask you about Gone Bananas. I wish I had a picture of it but the school bus that they used to haul that truck around with, chrome wheels. I mean,
Beautiful.
the sharpest. I wish I had a picture, but the sharpest school bus that we talked about, a couple weeks ago on Full Pull, talking about, different school buses and everything, and that was like the all-time sharpest. I don't know, what were they into that they did for a living?
Yeah,
Is that
he
what they
was
did?
an
excavating
excavator,
business.
and then his brother Charles was into power, like a lineman and doing, I think, excavating for power lines or
Okay.
that sort of thing. So, and then he had the Ford. Like his brother had the red Ford, the Hamilton power line, and then Jimmy had the yellow Gone Banana Chevrolet.
Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead.
So those two kind of, obviously hold such special spots in my heart, and Jeremy can vouch for the fact that there were big time guys. Jim Moots, obviously, in my middle age, sort of teenage years, is the guy that I started to really, really support. But when I was a little guy and I was a little bitty itty bitty boy, I always wanted to
You
be
did.
Paul Wilson.
Sundowner.
And Paul Wilson, he had the Sundowner. And so I used to pretend to drive the 4-wheel drive truck. I would run all around the house, and I was Paul Wilson. And obviously, I just adored this family, and I knew Paul and his family very well, and Mom was very close with them. They had a construction business. But Jeremy can vouch for stories of me on the mantle or on the little hearth.
I have to tell one on Miles. So Paul Wilson was notorious for stogies. He liked a long cigar, especially when he pulled. Like he would pull with a wet stogie in his mouth. And Miles had this old Tommy pedal 3-wheeler, like a plastic 3-wheeler. So it's like a quad sport 3-wheeler, but it's a pedal variety. So Miles would have full-on sunglasses, a helmet, a plastic fake cigar, and he would hook to the sled in the living room on his Tommy 3-wheeler and pull. And then he'd pull plumb down the hallway, and he'd get up and you'd interview him as Paul Wilson. And there are several photographs of him as Paul Wilson. And some are, more PC than others. And I just won't, I won't talk about some of the other things that happened during the Miles had a penchant for maybe pulling pantsless every so often.
Well, it got hot, behind the wheel.
There's pictures of me.
It happens, but no, Paul Wilson, and I believe he had two. He had the Sundowner, and then there was another one,
Sunriser.
Yeah,
Sunriser. Yep.
The Riser and the Downer. And but Paul Wilson was a great friend to us and my parents back in the day. But Miles just adored it. Wanted to be Paul Wilson at about age probably 2.5, 3, somewhere in there.
And
now I have two.
I was going to say, with
go ahead, Dano.
The super stock trucks that he drove, I'll never forget the first time seeing the super stock trucks. We were indoors in Niagara Falls, and I thought they were going to fall apart. I mean, blow apart. I mean,
9,000 RPM. Yeah, just
I mean, you got to be kidding me! Like, it's screaming them things. It was like, that. And at that time, we hadn't seen the modifieds just yet, but. Yeah, super stock 4-wheel drives were the first one we ever saw, and holy smokes, I'll never forget that. He thought, oh my gosh, these things are going to come flying apart, and what a class.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you go back into thinking about historical moments of your life, and I can think about this one. I can still tell you how much I remember this truck, but the next truck that I will talk about was Randy Stewart's coal train. I remember that truck, and I loved watching it so much. That Ford just came out, and it just made pass after pass, and the way that truck stood, the way that it hooked, everything about it quickly became one of my favorites. And it was a reason why the 4-wheel drive class was my favorite for the longest time. Like, it was the one that I could not wait to watch. I could tell you about every single competitor, and I just loved watching that class. And it started really, really deeply with that truck.
I think you always had a
there.
penchant and a sort of a soft spot in your heart for that body style of a Ford. Like if you go back and you look at those, there are several that I can think of from back in the day that have that same sort of body style, and we loved them all.
Wildfire.
If I could have one, I'd
79-ish, 79 Ford-ish. That was about that body style. But the Wildfire, and there was a whole bunch back. That style, and
Yeah.
Donna Webb's Sudden Impact was always one of my favorites as well. And then there were a few others that just kind of came out. Right now, there are a few folks out in Wisconsin who run one called Whiplash, I think is what it's called, that I really, really like to see every year at Toma, and enjoy watching that still. So you do find things that sort of set in and you love. The final one on my list was a guy who was a champion, but he was also just a really rad dude. And when I had a chance to be around him, I was fairly close with his daughter growing up as well. But that was Donnie Sanders and the Tennessean. I loved that truck, enjoyed being around, watching him as well with that. And I'm not just trying to be biased towards Chevy. I realize I got a whole list of Chevys here with the exception of Randy's Ford there, but I really enjoyed my list here of these folks, and there were several others I would have considered, and I had kind of in our group text of, hey guys, these are the other ones I would look at, but the 5 I'm going to circle are these, and I can tell you stories as to why. But if you go back into the archives of my youth and my young age, Paul Wilson as who I loved the most, and obviously my favorite truck was that Gone Bananas truck, and then as I grew up a little bit more, Jim Moots sort of became my favorite, and all those guys were unique in their own right. So Jeremy, without further ado, your chance to start releasing some
for
of
sure.
your
And I don't know how many pictures I got. I think I'm just gonna have to see what.
Yeah, we kind of had to cut her there because the list kept getting longer and longer as we kept going and thinking of hey, what about so
sure. Well, let me first start, and then Allie, I know you're listening, so if I forget one, you'll just have to pop it on there when I'm not talking anymore. But let's start with the Johnsons and that Oklahoma Showdown machine. One of the most beautiful old Chevrolets. We got that classic 1990s paint scheme and tough runners in their day. And this was one that I absolutely loved from way, way, way back. What about you guys?
Being at the banquet this year when they were inducted in the Hall of Fame, it was like, yes, they, them guys for so many years, all them miles, and no matter, what pull, they were always there, and they were tough. I mean, being in Western New York, they would always come to Hamburg, Syracuse, we would see them. And boy, they were just right there at they've won, many times. And I don't remember their old 68 Chevy. I remember the S10, but I don't recall their old Shake, Rattle, and Pull, I think was the name of their first one there, but I don't recall that one. But yeah, that was when that one came out, though, the new body style there in the 88, I think it was, at Angler Frame, I think it was. They made a big, there was always a big talk about that one, and boy, it definitely ran.
My first memory of that truck is actually a sweatshirt that Dad brought home from Bowling Green for me, and I want to say it was like 1987 or 88 that was featured on the shirt at BG, and Dad brought that shirt home. He went the first year Dad went to Bowling Green. He didn't take the family. The next year we all got to go with him, so he came home with T-shirts to make it better.
Actually, you know what? That was the second year I went there because it had the Walsh brothers on there too. It was the Walsh brothers, and then it had the Oklahoma Showdown on there too. So pretty cool.
All right, so my number 4 would have been great runner out of Texas, and the Hunter family, I believe, is their name. Old Yeller was one of my favorites, and there are a couple of different variations of Old Yeller, and this is one of the older ones. But of course, janky power, short wheelbase, old school, beautiful paint scheme. This one was one that spoke to me as a youngster. What about you guys?
Remember seeing it on ESPN, the short wheelbase, and then they finally lengthened it out there. And I believe 1990, I think it was, saw them at Hamburg, and they ran the Grand National circuit that year and had the longer wheelbase then. But yeah, they, only seen them a couple times, in real, not on TV, but yeah, they're very impressive.
Absolutely. Okay. Now,
yeah, unique body style.
Yeah, and I don't know if you guys have seen the one that they did, a few years ago, but there's been another variation that's just absolutely immaculate, slammed to the weeds. Just has this unbelievable stance on it. It is absolutely crazy. But that's one of my favorites. I saw him Well, I guess, Miles, we saw him when we went to Kilgore that year. I think that's where that
That's
truck
right.
was, and it was just breathtaking. So that's my number 4. Let's go to number 3. And Dan, you were talking about the Highwinders, and I have 2 Highwinders next, and this will be the Nightlife machine out of right here in the Louisville, Kentucky area. This was Buddy Jean, and of course we just lost Buddy this year. He just passed, I think, in late January or early February, but he was absolutely awesome, and that thing would just rev to the ceiling. And I remember seeing him not only at Louisville, but I can remember him at Thunder Valley in Greenville, Indiana, where Miles and I grew up, kind of our home track, and where Dad kind of got his start back in the day. Buddy Jean was one that would come to those polls put on by the volunteer fire department, and another tough runner here locally.
And Buddy Jean, seeing him actually beat the modified trucks up at Niagara Falls there when I've got a video somewhere. I got to pull that out. But yeah, I want to say it was 2 of the 3 days he beat the modified trucks up there with that super stock truck. And before, I know eventually he went to a modified truck, but at that time he was running, I think a couple guys used to do that here and there, super stocks against the modified trucks. And, them short tracks, that really, that's where saw him shine there. And yeah, no, that's impressive truck.
Well, and I think he did a lot of traveling with Jim Lyons and that bunch, and kind of shared like sort of the brain trust with the engines. I know they both did engine work. Of course, Jimmy Lyons was famous for having an engine shop here in Louisville, and I think they kind of shared information. But I can remember very, very vividly that truck, and then the truck we're going to talk about next. Indoors when those things would come out of the hole. To your point, Dan, that you're like, this thing's not going to stay together. But my number 2 would be the Boomerang, of course, of the Kentucky family, the Osterritters. This would be John Osterritter, of course. And this was another just absolutely screaming high-winding Chevrolet that you thought, my gosh, what on earth are these guys doing? And, 9,000 RPMs, every bit of that. And you're like, how's this working? But the Osterritters are still, believe it or not, in the game. John's son, Sean, is a 3.0 puller, and he has a machine called Moo Money that they run all around the country with various different sanctioning bodies. And I had the opportunity to see him out and about, so it's really cool to kind of see one of your childhood heroes and talk shop, as it were. But the Boomerang, of course, is one that will forever live, not only in my memory, but auditorily from you guys being announcers. You remember things with your ears, and those super stock trucks of the past. There's nothing like them as far as the revs go on those machines, because you just thought, man, they're gonna drop a clutch and put everything on the floor.
Like I say, 2 things from the very first pull I went to in the convention center in Niagara Falls was the super stock 4-wheel drive trucks and Tommy Brewer's 2-wheel drive.
The homebrew.
First one that hooked to the sled, a blown engine. I'll never forget it. It's just the loudest thing I've ever heard in my life, and yep, that was unbelievable. But yeah, it's amazing how, like you say, stuck in your head, it's.
Yep. Well, and the number 1 for me tonight, the pride of San Antonio, Texas, and my favorite 4-wheel drive of all times would be none other than Roy Holland's Texas Blue Bonnet, Jerry Janke powered machine out of the Lone Star State. He is my number 1 here tonight, and that truck in all of the various different capacities that it had and the different various paint schemes, it was my favorite.
Yeah, it was, you think about that truck, Jeremy, and if we were really digging into the uniquenesses of different paint schemes, this one might have been one that sort of, I recall this one, but it's not the one or one of them that I would have categorized as like my first,
sure,
one to
absolutely.
come from.
And I think that was a little further down the line, but like there were 3 or 4. The first one that I remember was just blue, deep, just. Yep. Well, it's the one here.
That one. Yeah, I was going to say that one there. Yep.
This one here was the one. And of course, his son, Eddie, is responsible for not only this, but several other Eddie Holland designs. He's done a lot of great pulling shirts and old Nitro drag racing shirts and various different racing.
Yep.
Yeah,
I wore
you had
mine
yours
last
last
week.
week. You have a black one, and I made him make mine in blue to match the truck. But he also had one called the Texan. He ran two for a while. In the early to mid 90s, there was a more of a modern style 90s Chevrolet bodied vehicle known as the Texan. But this one stands at the top for me. Roy Holland's famous Texas Bluebonnet for Jerry Janke. You know, had the cowboy hat and the boots, and Roy Holland was just you know, when that guy just oozed charisma, like just this guy is Texas through and through, man. I love it.
Through and through. Awesome. Well, all right, here we
All
go.
right, Dano.
Top 5, no particular order. I'm going to start off with my favorite version of the Oklahoma Showdown,
Fair enough.
which was the Chevy
Yes.
S10.
Yes.
And that truck right there just gleamed. I mean, it I don't know what it was. And, you know, Jeremy, going back to your point about the cowboy hat, you know, here the guys from Oklahoma show up and both of them got cowboy hats on. And it just, I don't know, that whole, they just reek truck pullers, you know, and it just, yeah, that truck there, it was just, I don't know what it was about it, just the stance of it. It was just, you know, something that I'll never forget, that, you know, seeing that truck for the first time.
Well, and I think the name of that truck, just the Oklahoma Showdown, that just seeing that on the graphics on the side, it just sounds cool and it looks racy. And, you know, every iteration of Oklahoma Showdown that we saw, just one right after the next, just seemed to get cooler and cooler and cooler. And before you knew it, they had
yeah, I agree with that. Not to take away from your S10 though, Dano. We're not saying it's not as cool as that full body Chevy.
You know, and going back to Dave Grimm, your dad, these guys drill oil for a living, and you're sitting there going, "Oh, that's pretty cool." I mean, you know, being from Western New York, it's like these guys drill oil, man. It's pretty badass, you know. It's
absolutely.
Like,
but then,
you know, come on.
You look at the times though, and you know, ZZ Top and the Eliminator and those, you know, those stripes were everywhere.
Right.
I think the Johnsons kind of picked up on that, and my favorite Oklahoma Showdown had the stripes, but I also respect your favorite Oklahoma Showdown.
All right, well, we're going to move on to my number 4 here. The second version of the Tennessean was my one of my favorites. And here you can see that was the second incarnation. Now, this was kind of on the downside here of Donnie Sanders. He only pulled for a year or two more. And if memory serves me right, that went to Rob Foster, I thought. Wasn't that his first truck?
I think you're right.
Yeah, I think that was.
I agree with that. And I think that there's a little bit of homage back to that paint scheme, sort of in that new paint that he brought.
It was, you know, this scheme there, you know, with the Tennessean, you know, was always, you know, only saw it a couple times, you know, at Bowling Green and then, you know, out here at Syracuse. And, you know, just, I don't know what it was, that era. It was that era with the airbrush, you know, everybody started to do, you know, kind of not the.
I feel like we saw him in Nashville, didn't we? Or somewhere close to his home base. I feel like we saw him at several pulls in the state of Tennessee back in the day. Maybe Chapel Hill. But I was thinking maybe there was a fairgrounds pull one time at the Speedway that he was at. But absolutely. And I just remember, you know, thinking,
Owensboro for sure. We used to see him at Owensboro because I remember being with his daughter and in the pit area and over at the fairgrounds and everything as well. So
if I remember right, didn't his partner there, Tommy Rogers, was that his name? There was like the Miles's favorite version there. It was, you know, they had 2 drivers at one point, and then, you know, Donnie kind of took over, you know, that all the driving there after that. But yeah, that was my number 3 truck on my list. We're going to move, or actually number 4 truck. Number 3 truck was one that, growing up in the age of you go into the grocery store and you could grab a magazine off the shelf that had truck pulling in it.
Yep.
And this truck right here, the Motown Missile, I'll never forget seeing pictures of this thing and just, I don't know what it was, the purple that got me, but it was just Joe Gilbert's truck out of Michigan. And every big name magazine had the Motown Missile in it, and it was one of those things where, and speaking of all the big, magazines and everything, this date in history, April 9th, 1983, the largest crowd to ever see a truck pull. Pontiac Silverdome, 76,000 people.
Wow.
And,
I didn't know that was this.
For some reason, it always sticks in my head because it was in a magazine. But yes, 76,000 people to see a truck pull. And, that was what
I was 2.5 there. So
that was what made me 8. But yeah, that was the Motown Missile. And that was back in the day where the promoter would actually have vehicles, they had a Blue Max. They kind of did a lot of things with, drag racing names,
right?
The Green Monster and, a lot of stuff like that to kind of appeal to the fans. And I don't know what it was, just that purple, there was a lot of color pictures of that truck. And for some reason, it just always stuck with me. But my number 2 truck, Manuel Moreno, the Yellow Rose of Texas, the yellow truck. That one right there, that was the first year that he came to Hamburg, New York. And that truck just, I don't know if it was the yellow, the scheme, or just the Manuel himself, just on the microphone, hey, I'm going to beat these guys and I don't care about it. He was just,
right.
That kind of character, he would just go out there and I'm going to win and I'm going to, and short to the point. And, that was a favorite truck for sure.
Well, it was really cool to see. I think the Holmans or somebody was on a road trip not long ago.
Yes.
And they posted photos of the shop, and not this truck, but the later series, they still have it. It's still in the shop. And I'm like, get it out. Come on, bring it.
And I think the son later on drove it. Like he was out on the, the national circuit with it later on. But yeah, that was, oh boy, that was another tough janky powered.
Yeah, you talk about Jerry Janky back in those days between him and Holland and Tommy Holman, the Saturday Night Driller, Dwayne Bateke and the STP machine. It seems like all of those janky powered vehicles were just forces back in the day.
And didn't STP Banky work for him? I thought he worked for
I believe he did.
Yep, I thought he was in that hole. I know he had one, but I thought he actually worked for him there at one point. But yeah, just you wanted big horsepower. That's where you went and 4-wheel drive, and
also a successful pro stock racer in his own right. Back
yeah, absolutely. General Lee Edwards, he was another one that.
Yep.
But my all-time favorite, the black gold truck out of Oklahoma. Now this truck here, this was Paula Guin.
Yep.
And there you see the black gold. Now she was the first lady to ever win a national championship. She did so back in 1985, and she beat all the guys down in New Orleans, the Superdome down there, and she was the first woman to win a national championship with the Ford Budweiser Series. And that truck there, I have the little what were they called, SST trucks back in the day? They, with the pulling sled, and when you could actually get something. Yep. In the store there, in the toy store, that 10 years old, you had black gold, you had orange blossom, you were it,
Absolutely.
So that was. But yeah, no, that truck right there. And another thing too with magazines, you would see that one in the magazines all the time. And Steve Reyes, the world famous drag racing photographer, he did a lot of that, with the magazine publications back then. And pretty interesting. Now, Paula's husband, Kenneth, another guy that actually the Oklahoman truck, that's one that actually Wayne Purser ended up with many, many years later, and ran out on the outlaw circuit back when he started up pulling.
Now, didn't they run full flip tops?
Paula's truck used to open up and the front would open up. Yeah,
it was tilted.
That's what
I remember that. There were, you think about guys, and I know we're getting on our time. We're almost to an hour here, and we're going to get longer and longer, it seems like, as we get deeper in this. But I'm going to challenge you guys a little bit as well. I think about, it seems to me like some of the most iconic vehicles in the history of the sport of pulling or four-wheel drive trucks in my mind. like a Dodge van that came out that was
Enterprise.
canary yellow, and the Enterprise
Gary
truck
Carlton,
that
right?
you know, used to see on
El
there.
Camino.
Or I remember the very first time, and to this day, like it just sticks in my mind, the very first time that I saw two decently sized men pick up the back of Bud Jaskey's tube frame
Yep.
Chevy S10 and just
Yeah,
go,
move it
and
around and-
just,
Move
oh,
it
it's in the
around.
way. Okay. But that, I think that vehicle as a whole kind of stands out in my mind. It's like, my gosh, like maybe that was, you know, like similar to what the four plate truck will be. And, you know, and I didn't categorize it in my today because it's still present. But you start looking at the, you know, like Lim Freeday's truck,
Yep.
it sticks into my mind. And there are others that I continue to think about and
Right.
sort of keep coming to my mind, like Glenn Davis's Mr. Sparkle truck. You know, polished, shined, awesome. The dude all the way from Florida, like that.
Well, and I had a couple
blows
too
your
that
mind.
didn't make my top 5, but I think they do bear mention. Of course, Tom Worth's After Hours is another one. The Amsoil sponsored machine. Couldn't find a photograph of it, but it's one of my favorites from way back. I also think that the High Roller of Howard Lewis is another one that I was struggling with. I felt like needed to be in there. The Three Bears, the Virginia-based.
Oh yeah.
The Smiths. I feel like they needed to be there. And then I also really enjoyed the Joe Flannery machine. Yeah, that's
PBS
the one.
Is
That,
the lowrider
Red
one.
ST.
yeah, the one that was kind of dropped to the bottom. I always enjoyed that one, but we could talk for hours and hours. But those were ones that I feel like, and of course we should talk about the Winchester, Virginia connection. The Omps boys didn't make the show, and they probably should have at least.
Yeah, you had the Umps boys, you had Bob Minnick with the small change and
Yep.
Super Hog,
All
and
change.
then you had you know, the Three Bears. Now the Three Bears, there was always something I remember with Bowling Green with Harold and your dad talking about the smell of the bear. So I don't remember if Harold would always make a comment about, you know, the smell of that bear. I don't know if it sat out in the rain too long or what it was, but
But
I wish I
and
could go back in time and
well,
it was
while we're talking about the Three Bears, I would be remiss, and I won't go into great detail. But I
You
think
gotta
it's
tell the whole
important
story.
to tell a funny. So I don't know. I'm probably 12, 13, 14. I think I'm in 7th grade, 8th grade. I'm in the tower with my father at Davis County, Owensboro, 2 tracks, big show. And my father is announcing, and he got the urge, and he needed to go very quickly. And he just handed me the microphone and walked out. And so
that was your first taste.
that was my first taste. I announced Mr. Three Bears, and I think I said his name about 97 times, and that was him. Three Bears. There you go.
You remember
Virginia.
the distance? No,
I don't remember the distance, and
I would have thought it would have been engraved in.
Dad got
Not
back.
sure
No,
you
I'm
read
not
it.
sure I read it. I'm not sure I was told it. I was scared to death and just waiting for Dad to get back, and he went quickly and got his business done and came back. But that was another, you were talking about the smell of the bear. That's those stories around that truck just made me. They remember. Dad just, hey, take the mic. I gotta go. And I'm like, what are you handing it to me for? What am I gonna do with it?
Miles, what were some of your also rans that were on that list?
Yeah, no, I had, I had several that I think, like I said, Mr. Sparkle was one that I think just kept coming to my mind when I started to think more and more and more about historical folks. Jeremy mentioned one earlier, and then Tommy Holman, his Saturday Night Driller. And I think I need you to help me with a little bit of this, but My Little Mule. Do you
Billy
remember when
Loftus?
that truck
Billy
came
Loftus,
out?
yep.
Loftus's truck. I loved that truck and
Lowrider.
getting to see it. And Jeremy, there was one, and you're going to have to remind me because I think you became close with his family as well. But the last name was Fisher,
the
I
Blue Chip
believe.
Express.
The Blue Chip Express,
Yeah.
and that may have been a blower truck.
Yeah,
I don't
that
know
was-
if it was
that was a
a modified 4-wheel drive. So that's kind of confusing me. And you go back into the modified versus blown trucks. Obviously, that's kind of a little bit of a cross. Anson Sebastian and Debbie, and kind of getting to watch then when Deb brought out the Night Train truck. I remember it so very well. I also remember Harry Owen and Jayco, and when they brought their trucks out and enjoying those. And another one I think just has to be mentioned, and we got to work with him some on the promoter side of things, and then got to watch his son pull a 2-wheel drive truck. But I remember when the Spellbound truck came out, and when Mike Chastain and then Jared went on to do his thing, and that was just one of the most tough outs in a Chevy that just ran like crazy.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to see that at the farm show, like for the first time. And, being where I was from, you didn't get to see it outdoors. Just Bowling Green really was the only place you saw the Spellbound. And just, your dad, Harold, talking about, how tough that truck was. And, seeing that truck, it just, they, like you say, they had quite a streak there for, 3-4 years. They were the truck to beat,
One more, and I know we got to go, but I just keep thinking this was another one that I struggled with, the Chico, California-based Tinker toy.
Yep.
Of
It
Bruce McClintock. It had
Bruce
the bicycle wheel.
The wheel on the back of it.
On the back of it. I never really understood what that was all about, but he was like a pecan farmer or something, or a cashew farmer.
Pecans.
Almonds.
Yeah, almond or pecan out there.
That truck, another one of those late 70s Fords.
Yep.
Alan Sneed's Lost in the 50s is one I mentioned in our text group that was definitely, kind of the body style and everything.
2 of my also rans, the Gone AWOL 68 Jeep.
Yep.
Used to see that one quite a bit up by us because he was from the Pennsylvania area. And then the Virginian truck, a D.O. Wilson, the blue metallic on that truck.
Beautiful.
Probably the most, well, he was a painter back in the day. So that's where that all.
Well, he went on to monster trucks too, right?
Yep. He actually, went on the Virginia Giant there. And I think he still does the monster truck thing. But yeah, that Virginian truck, seen that, another guy from, Winchester, Virginia. But that was one of the, just the showstoppers, so. But yeah, that we go on all night.
Roger Crawford and his truck, and the Excite Exciter, Jerry Weaver,
Nationwide
coming out. I'm like, ooh, look at that thing. With the
I don't know about you guys,
pink.
but I remember seeing Studley Studebaker for the first time.
Oh yeah,
there's another one that.
Saw that one I think for the first time with a blower on it.
Yep.
I think when they ran, never saw it with naturally aspirated, but saw it when it was supercharged there. When they remember Bowling Green used to Friday night would run the supermod trucks and
yes sir.
And then, but yeah, wow, guys, that was
so
we
do that all night long.
It's going to be great fun. Like
hour.
As we get into all these other classes, I'm looking forward to nostalgia. Oh, yeah. This is going to be great.
And then you start.
We hope that. Collectively, we hope that people will share images or their favorite vehicles. Like let's talk about it. I mean, we're sharing our stories, but obviously we hope that this will bring a memory out in your mind, one that we've talked about or one that was in competition with ones we've talked about. And obviously, as we get a little deeper, maybe we can encourage you. Pro stocks are next, so start thinking about who your top 5 are in the pro stocks, and kudos to those top 5 that are on our list for 2025's Puller rankings here. That's pretty awesome.
I will bet that there's going to be a bunch of people who write and tell us trucks we forgot or are
I'm sure
aren't included that we'll be able to dig back into. This has been great fun.
Oh, absolutely. Good time. And next week we'll have, of course, our pro stock rankings will lead us into the show. And there we see once again, the order that we're going to see them out here in the next few weeks, be followed by the modifieds. That'll be interesting as well. Super stocks, we'll have the mini rods, the super stock diesel 4-wheel drives, and then we'll conclude it all with the unlimited modified rankings here. So, well, guys, it's been a blast. Once again, episode 4. Before you know it, we're already on that time limit already. So fortunately, there's no Chase's show isn't coming up next, the no practice. So we're not on top of that. So we're good this week.
Awesome. Well, fellas, it's been great fun, and thanks to Allie for pushing the buttons and being with us here tonight, and thanks to you for all your feedback and all your viewership and all the positive comments you've been giving us. And again, we hope you'll share your favorites. We hope you'll share your top 5s, and we hope to make this a very interactive podcast going forward. So thanks for all you guys have done, and thanks to Full Pull.
Absolutely, and we'll see you all back here next week, 7:00 Eastern time. And get ready, because we'll have the pro stock rankings ready to go.
Big smoke.